where's the date? November 18th,
No,
2013.
mine's fine, mine's good. Mine's good. You just want to
The November 18th, 2013 meeting of the Sewer Authority Midcoastside Board of Directors is called to order. Roll call, please.
Director Kowalczyk.
Here.
Director Alfano.
Here.
Chair Warren.
Present.
Vice Chair Harvey.
Here.
Director Boyd.
Here.
Director Clark.
Here.
Please stand for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item 2, public comment, oral communication. Do we have comments from anyone, members of the public for items not on the agenda or directors? Hearing none. Item 3, we have no closed session. Item 4, consent agenda. I noticed one little typo in the minutes, which I guess I missed the first time around. So I think we're just gonna have to mention it, we're gonna have to approve it subject to getting it filled in. At the bottom of page 3, under attorney's report, it says, we discussed state legislation SB and the number is missing, so if we could get the number filled in.
What I was gonna do there, I caught the same one, I was gonna, the status of certain proposed state legislation. Because there are about 4 or 5.
So why don't you pass the change on to the recording secretary, and so is there anything to be held for discussion, or is there a motion on consent agenda?
Well, I have a question about the disbursements. Did everybody get all the pages? I only got the odd numbered pages.
No, I think it's one. No, I have them.
Here, I'll print another one for you.
Thank you.
I do as well.
Well, since I get the magnified copy, you want the oral side copy?
They're in the computer list.
Yeah. Here, you can
Sure.
have my copy.
You get the magnified copy?
Yeah. Big print, big paper.
Oh, yeah, I didn't get the back.
That costs extra, you know.
I didn't get the back sides.
Big time.
Yeah, just wait till I start filing ADA requests. Okay, so, is there a motion, or is there anything to be held for discussion?
Well, let's hold the disbursements until he has a chance to
Okay.
review.
All right, so is there a motion for the minutes to be corrected, the manager's monthly report, and authorize the scheduling of a public hearing on the proposed non-domestic waste source control program, NDWSCP, fee schedule for FY 2013-14?
So moved.
No.
There's a second.
Second.
So moved and seconded, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, any extensions? So the consent agenda is approved minus the disbursements. And I guess we'll come back to that later in the agenda. Okay, 5A, discuss status of recruitment of general manager. Should I cover it?
Sure.
The search firm, Bob Murray Associates, picked, I forget the numbers, I think 9 of 16 applications. I think we received 16, give or take 1, applications, and based on qualifications, they interviewed about 9 of those, and we're trying to set up a meeting date. Having, we wanted it to be this week, but various people have scheduling conflicts, and so we're looking for new dates. And it so the committee will meet with Bob Murray Associates and listen to the results of their interviews, and my assumption, and the other committee members and the rest of the board for that matter can disagree, and then we'll discuss it if there's any disagreement. My feeling is that we will, the committee with the discussion with Bob Murray Associates will break down to 3 or 4 to be brought to the board for the full board to interview. Does that make sense? I think that's the way we've done it
Was that the
before.
process of they come to the full board for interview, or do they get interviewed by the committee?
As far as I know, the committees have never done interviews. It was the search firm narrowing it down, and then.
The committee has narrowed it down previously, so, but I think in doing so, we would still bring the full set. You know, so if the full board wanted to, say, bring somebody in anyway.
You mean all of the 9 that BMA?
What I was anticipating was that we 3 would work with Bob Murray and Associates to look at the candidates that they felt strongly about recommending and bringing in for an interview, and then taking our feedback as well to decide whether or not it would be the full set that we bring in or a subset. Remember, I mean, if we bring a subset and decide we need to go back and revisit somebody, there's plenty of precedent for this board having done that before. So the idea is, let's get a good set to do the interviews with. We're not going to be able to interview 9 in one night, no matter what we do. So I think we will be talking about what do we think is feasible to recommend for our first go-round. But we haven't had that meeting yet, so we're hoping to have that meeting this week. Are we going to be able to pull it off?
It's probably gonna have to be next week.
Okay.
So,
Maybe late this week, I'll reply tonight.
So
Next
that's-
week's Thanksgiving week, that'll be interesting.
so let me just make sure I get this, so you have 9 people, 9 applications.
I think it was 9, like I said, plus or minus 1.
And you guys are gonna meet, the committee's gonna meet to choose, to talk about those and choose 3.
So the 9 have been interviewed, is
so.
that correct?
Hmm?
The 9 have been interviewed?
Right.
I missed that.
By
By
Bob
Bob
Murray,
Murray,
they
since
did the phone interviews.
Oh,
Okay.
Right. I would call it a screening or something, but. yeah.
So what time scale are we talking about? You guys might meet this week or next
Well,
week?
It sounds like next week.
Yeah, it looks like this week's not gonna work.
Alright.
So, I would hope that everybody has Monday night available, since that would have been the regular Sam board meeting night.
I'm more flexible next week, actually, so
okay.
whatever, why don't you lead with a suggestion, I'll probably.
Okay, great, thank you.
And then, at what point would we start doing the interviews, or what do you think? When might that happen?
Well, since we don't have a regular meeting in December, let's decide that now. Would we wanna have a special meeting just for the candidate interviews? Then the question is when.
I think it's safe to say we're gonna have a set that we're gonna wanna bring forward. So then the question is timing.
Yeah.
If it's gonna, like the last time, I think we did 2 evenings where we did interviews, we broke it into 2 sets.
I think we
tried to
interviewed
put those
6
pretty
people.
close together, so we don't leave anybody hanging too long.
Mhm.
What did we interview, like 6 people last time?
I think something like that.
Yeah, so that's why it was split over 2 nights.
So, help me with this, if you guys have 9 good candidates from Bob Murray, and you're going through them in interviews, whatever, my assumption is you're gonna winnow that down to the ones you think would be the best candidates?
I hope so. I mean, for one, I don't want the full board to have to sit here through 9 full interviews if there's no purpose to that.
Yeah.
If they're
I
all
want
so
Alan
great
to,
that we have to
but
talk to all
that's
9, we'll bring it
addictive.
back, but, you know, I think we could probably shake it down a bit.
Can I further assume that when the committee comes forward, you'll probably have a ranking and rating?
I don't know that I would wanna pre-bias too much on that.
I would suggest the committee not try and do that, but, you know, 'cause basically, what I envision the committee doing is, based on the comments from whoever at Bob Murray did the interviews, you know, basically a collaborative effort between the 3 committee members and the people from Bob Murray, we will narrow it down to like 3 or 4 to bring to the board.
I think part of what we're looking for is you guys are gonna each bring a perspective that we're not gonna have, so I don't wanna try to shape your view on it too much before you get the chance to look at somebody.
Now, the one thing I'll note is that, I didn't go back and look at the resumes from the ones they did interview, but, reviewing the reasons for the ones they chose not to interview, I agree with all of their, decisions for who not to interview. There were some people who were seriously not qualified.
Yeah, we'll give you guys an idea. I think, after the committee meets, we should be able to, get an idea to the full board about what we would ask for in terms, or what we think would be appropriate for meetings. How many we think it might take. We can work with our manager to, see about trying to schedule that. What kind of, if this is gonna take 2 nights, are you guys up for doing this in December?
Well, if the committee decides to bring 3, we can do that in one night. Any more than 3, it'll have to be 2 nights, I think.
I'm kinda guessing, I don't know, I'd like to know now if we think it's best to do 2 nights.
Well, you schedule 2 and you cancel 1 if you can cancel it. right?
Sure, yeah.
So looking at this December calendar, do we wanna try and come up with dates now for that? Or do we want to,
This is the fun part of the job.
we could all email some Sam's staff member and let them overlay the schedules.
The folks at home love this part.
Can
Can we all look at our calendars right now?
Can we take any Monday, in
Well, there's a
December, first
football
couple
game
Mondays
on.
in December?
Yeah.
I would hope that Mondays will work.
Yeah, the first couple Mondays in December, maybe? Fine with me.
There's one I can do,
Yeah,
I can do first and second Monday.
Yeah, that should work for me.
I'll pencil it in.
I can think of any Christmas party I have scheduled on Monday.
Which days, I'm sorry?
So Monday the 2nd and Monday the 9th.
So the 9th is if we need more time.
Okay.
Those are about it's about the only 2 days in December that are gonna work.
Perfect, pencil them in now.
If you guys just come in with 3, that'd be fine with me.
All right, well, let's see if we can winnow it down, but if we can't, we'll,
We're talking 7 start?
yeah.
Which one, 9 and 16?
No.
2 and 9?
2 and 9.
2 being the priority, yeah.
Right, so December 2nd for sure, and then if we decide we need more time, we'll continue on to December 9th.
That's gonna be awesome.
Do we need any staff for that, other than, somebody to have the building open?
Yeah, typically we do interviews just the board.
I
Yeah,
think,
that's my recollection.
We need a staff person to open up the door.
That's
Yeah.
what I said.
I consider this a first round, and if we have a hiring decision, or we can always come back for a second round.
Yeah,
Fine.
yeah, again, we've got a lot of precedent for doing that.
All right, so sounds like that's set. Anything else for this item? All right, so we will move to new business, 6A, receive information on operating revenue expenses as compared to budget for FY 2013-14.
So I have been told that you've never received a staff memo like this in the past, so this will be great discussion. So at this meeting, we were preparing to report to the board on the anticipated return of operations and maintenance revenue from fiscal year 2012-2013, which ended June 30th, 2013. And in looking at the information, the June report that was presented to the board showed that the expenditures were under budget. But the final numbers, as we learned, show that the expenditures exceeded the operations and maintenance budget by approximately $86,000. This is different than the capital reserve that's been under discussion at prior meetings. And the number still needs to be confirmed through the audit, which should be completed next month. So we'll have a firm number for you in the luncheon. And we did ask Kevin Anderson to come also to answer questions if you have them.
So we overspent the budget.
Which is kind of a first, I think,
We
since
shouldn't
I've
do
been on
that.
the board.
That's, did we, well, I don't want to put you in a tough spot, but did we not see it coming? So I consider that a surprise, and I don't,
Right.
we don't think we should have surprises, of course. And I guess I didn't see it coming, but,
And I can't, unfortunately, I can't answer these questions because they occurred in June and prior.
yeah.
But maybe Kevin, or I don't know.
Yeah,
if
I mean,
their
looking
staff
at,
can-
Do you have any insight what the what budget accounts were overages?
there's one, I mean, there's several that are somewhat over, but one in particular is just engineering fees. And it was over by around $200,000, so it's a significant amount.
Could you,
I've had a request for you to come to the podium.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, it's above by about $200,000, and I spoke with Tony briefly before the meeting to see what it was, and aside from, you know, he said a few 20,000-30,000 expenditures were approved here and there by the board, but we would have to go look in detail to see what exactly, what that was spent on. So we don't know at this point exactly
So-
why it's so far over.
through the chair, can we, fair to give that direction to figure out those $200,000 of overages?
I think that's a big enough number that we should know where, yeah.
Yeah.
When was the re-sleeving of the sewer plant road pipeline done? The re-sleeving of the pipeline in the road out here?
It was around June.
I think it was the previous fiscal year.
Was it the previous fiscal year? I thought it was in
I think it was
this.
really close.
I thought it was in the,
This current one.
well, not the current one, the prior fiscal year, but we're talking about,
That's what we're talking about.
right, that's one, yeah. I thought it was last fall.
It's very possible. I don't recall specifically, but
If it was last-
it'll come out as we
Yeah.
look through it.
I mean, that's the first thing that comes to mind. That was unanticipated, it was an emergency, and,
That was pretty expensive.
yeah, but we got in, I forget, was it Anderson Pacific who did that one as well?
No, it was a sleeping company.
Right.
And a bypass company and a lot of engineering fees.
Yeah.
Would the construction costs have been in this budget line item, or would they have been in another?
Well, the engineering costs would be within this. The other costs would be most likely under that top, the wet weather non-capitalized expenditures. There's about 80,000 in there, but that, it's kind of complicated how that account gets formulated, but it really is just the engineering costs, from what I saw, is the main culprit by far. So I think,
Is this purely engineering, or is there some actual construction cost?
well, usually with the engineering account, Tony can add on to this, but usually it is associated with, obviously, a lot of construction. But from what I see, I would imagine there's probably some construction within this engineering cost, but again, you know,
Well, shouldn't each of those engineering tasks be associated specifically with a project or a task?
well, they are if they're budgeted capital items or, you know, things that have been accounted for, but if they're just, so oftentimes, you know, there's only $75,000 budgeted to this engineering, and usually it's around that amount. But usually that's just for kind of regular occurrences, monthly occurrences of engineering costs. So when it goes over, it is kind of be related to the project that you just, you know,
Yeah,
talked about.
I'm concerned because the notion of, I mean, we've seen the checks, we've seen
Yeah,
what's coming through, and it's not like we've had unauthorized engineering work, so
yeah.
I don't like the characterization, frankly, so it's, we're surprised by perhaps the bottom line number, but it suggests to me that things haven't been allocated appropriately into the various tasks and projects that were underway and assigned to the manager, so I'd like to make sure that where we can, we tag it for the activity that's associated with, rather than lump it up all under one thing. It's like when we look at legal expense, it gets a lot more useful to us when we look at, is it coming to board meetings, is it consulting with the manager, is it drafting potential legislation, is it going, you know, what it's the activity that we're talking about that's actually interesting on whether or not it was spent appropriately, so.
So do you think there should be kind of sub-accounts essentially of engineering costs, like different types of engineering costs? Or you're talking about there's gonna be costs in there that belong to some sort of particular project.
Well, I think there's probably some kind of,
I don't think we
It's-
know, right?
it's not petty cash, but I mean,
Right.
there is the bits and pieces that are directed by the manager, you know, hey, would you do this, hey, would you do that? But then there's, you know, anything substantial enough should definitely be associated with a project, or at least an identified task.
Right.
You know, I'm asking you to go, if I ask you to go look at our policy manuals and see what they need, that's not just random engineering work, that's an identifiable task that we've talked about at the board. So I would hope to see that we can account for it by activity and classification of activity, category of activity, more than, you know, because that's not just granularity, but that's actually transparency and accountability. Right?
Don't we create new account numbers for significant projects?
Correct.
So the engineering for those projects should be billed to those account numbers.
And they are, you know, this wouldn't include, normally, so we're gonna look at the detail, make sure none of those are in the wrong account here. But I know for a fact there are engineering costs from last year that went to the wet weather project and other projects as well, so that does get done. It's just, I don't know if this entire 280,000 that was spent was coded correctly, but
So, through the
Tony and I
chair,
will have to go
the-
through it.
So this account is over by how much again? 200?
No, no.
86,000.
No,
Well,
this,
no,
this,
206.
this account's over by 206.
Yep.
And then, and what's the total size of that account?
It's a $75,000 budget.
Okay, so it's at
It's like
281.
almost quadruple, yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Okay, so I guess what I'd like to see is the details about what's in the account, and we can see if it's misallocated or if it's properly allocated, and then from there we'll know what to do.
It sounds like what happens in the checkbook when you just put everything in miscellaneous, you know, and when it's just like, you know, take the time and put it on, you know, groceries and haircuts or whatever.
Well, I think obviously this would be the January meeting, would you come back?
Yeah.
I think not only would we like to know the breakdown of what it was, but then if there's a recommendation,
Mhm.
so for two things, one, that we can maybe track this better during the fiscal year in case something starts to go over, we're well aware of it, and then, maybe some ideas as to what caused these, and is there anything we can do in the future to avoid it? I mean, I think it's kinda like what we talked about with the, I think at the last meeting, where the manager has a project for, say, $1 million and has a 5 or 10%, you know, overage capability. I think we would expect that that project might come in at $1 million, $1.5 million, $1.1 million, and you know, we're able to handle that. Anytime it goes over 5 or 10%, then there should be something triggered saying, uh-oh, we have to have the board look at this.
Right.
But I'm assuming in January you'll come back with
Yeah.
that.
I will.
Okay, should we move on to the next agenda item?
Do we need a motion?
This is informational.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to let you know too, the final numbers will come, you know, via the audit as well, so, which I think will be presented in January.
Now, there is actually a recommended motion here.
Oh, yeah, we actually should, because there is a requirement by the reserve policy to allocate those funds by the end of the year. So we do need a motion.
If I could just real quickly, it looks like we wrapped up the emergency repair in June of 2012. So just on the other side of that window. But I don't know where some of that was accounted for, where the bills came in, so
We'll go through all of it.
Yeah.
figure
that's
it
just a thought.
out. Thanks.
I would make a motion that we authorize staff to defer the discussion regarding issuance of refunds to the SAM member agencies until the January 27th SAM meeting. And I would further add that we were looking for explanations of the overages and then possible recommendations for future ways to address this.
One second.
I won't even ask to have that motion read back.
Aye.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, any abstentions, motion carries. Item 6B, authorized payment of CDP fees for annual weed abatement. Don't we get like the courtesy discount from the city?
Really?
So this item is related to the annual work that we do on the grass on this parcel, and because the location has sensitive species, there is a requirement for an environmental evaluation and report in advance of cutting the grass. Tony's been working with the City of Half Moon Bay staff, talking about different consultants to do this work, and the recommendation was to use, it was TRA to do the work. We have talked recently, and H.T. Harvey did the work before, but the city recommended TRA. So the city obtained an estimate from TRA, which was $8,100. We have requested that the permit, because this will be about 4 times the amount or 3 times the amount of cutting the grass, that the permit be in effect for 5 years, so that every year when we cut the grass, we don't need to get another $8,000 evaluation.
Who's TRA?
I've never spoke with them.
I mean, what does that stand for, do you know?
I don't.
Used to be Thomas Reed Associates, they're in Palo Alto.
And then after the environmental assessment is reviewed, then the City of Half Moon Bay will provide the CDP to allow us to proceed with the weed abatement. And the recommended motion is to provide direction as to how to proceed, whether it be with TRA or we prefer another consultant. But right now we're asking for authorization for up to $8,100 to begin this environmental study so that the weed abatement can proceed.
I really would like Sam to get the quote from H.T. Harvey, which has done it, I guess, twice before, at least. I think, didn't they do the original one when we were buying the property?
I'm not sure about that.
Because there's some extensive report available, I think it's on the SAM website, about the severe restrictions on what can be done with that property, and I think that was done, I think that original very first report was written by H.T. Harvey. And so I definitely would like to see SAM staff get a quote from them on this. I just have better warm fuzzies about H.T. Harvey than, what was the name of the other one?
TRA.
TRA. Something about TRA that I can't put my finger on.
I don't know. Do we have a say, since you state that this is chosen by the city?
The city is not allowed to dictate who the consultant is, sorry.
As long as they're certified or whatever.
No, okay, so the staff report says this evaluation is done by a trained biologist chosen by the city. That's the part I'm.
Yeah, we were under the impression that since they recommended the one consultant, that we needed to go with them.
But
But if
I think
that's
we
the
want to
case-
be sensitive to the sensitivity of this parcel and some of the issues that have been involved with it, so we want to make sure to do a really good job here. Yeah, I'm not familiar with TRA. I'm Googling quickly to see if I can find, and I think, here's something, no, that's, there's a background thing.
This is.
One of the other comments I would make is typically at least 4 directors here have been pretty adamant that we will do the minimum legally required there, and we will not try and level the whole parcel as some of the neighbors want done. Some of the neighbors want every living thing taken out of there down to bare dirt, and
There's a pro-dirt community here?
you got usually 4 votes here that just say, no, that's not gonna happen.
I've never heard any of that. I don't support that either. I'm not one of those 4, but I don't support that either.
And you love our beaches?
Not your beaches, because apparently,
Let's be careful here.
apparently I'm pro sewage on the beach, but
Sewage on the beach and dirt in the fields.
I don't know,
That's,
Well, when they trim normally, what's normal? I mean, cut it down to like
What's normal is
Well-
cut it down to like an 8-inch height, and only in the areas that they can do, they cut breaks, right? And so we've shown over the years that we can do this in a way that addresses the fire concern. Although going into the rainy season, I'm a little curious about our timing. Is this in anticipation of next year's work?
Yes.
June, yes,
Okay, all right, good.
And how often do we cut?
once a year.
That's all?
Yeah,
So if we get the permit for 5 years, if we needed to, we could cut more often if we had to?
Yeah, I don't think we do though, and the fire department only requires that one time.
well, it's
Okay.
actually, and it has to be done under the supervision of a biologist and to make sure that well, I mean, but they're the ones skilled in finding it is a sensitive and endangered species habitat that's been pretty well identified. So because of that, we just want to do it carefully, and we've done it successfully, where they've managed, they've monitored, they've made sure that we did it well, and that after the fact, they checked to make sure that there was no impact on the species of concern.
I have a vague recollection that last time there was a requirement for some environmental monitor walk in front of the tractor and like chase away
That's
any.
exactly what they do
That's
each year.
usually what
Yeah.
happens, yeah.
And they'll do 2 passes, the first is down to about 12 inches, and they'll check again, and then they go down to, I think it's 4 or 6 inches.
So you have to get video of the guy
Well,
walking in front of the tractor.
Is it worth it? I mean, do you remember what happened when they were building the BART extension to the airport? And they came across a San Francisco garter snake that had been mauled by some of the equipment. It set the project back. There's no call for that. If we can have someone walk in front and get this done, we've gotten it done every year since we started doing this.
What does the cutting cost?
We did it actually very inexpensively the last couple of times. I think it was, for the person doing the cutting, was about $300 or $400. The biologist was much more. He was there out there 2 days, he has to do a pre-inspection.
So that's on top of the $8,000?
Yeah.
The $8,000 just for the permit.
But the city can discount that.
We need every penny we get. I would make a motion that we provide direction to the interim general manager to pick a,
Can we say get a quote from H.T. Harvey and then decide?
H.T. Harvey is familiar with this, has done it before, and
to proceed with the biological assessment and authorize staff to proceed with commission study and payment of the CDP permit fees for annual weed abatement with a recommendation to look into getting a quote from, was it HTC?
H.T. Harvey.
H.T. Harvey.
No relation to this
Thing.
You gonna walk out in front of the mower there, Jim?
Is there a second?
Yeah, I second the motion.
Okay, so moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Aye.
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
No.
Motion carries. Let me mention, for those of you who don't know, that in some past year, the fire department tried to get us to level the whole property, and I said, state law only says for a parcel that size, you cut fire breaks to make it into 1 acre, I think it's 1 acre sections.
Roughly. And we've done even less than that though, like most recently.
yeah. But early on, the fire department was interested in getting the best they could, and then, but I think Tony and everybody worked with them, and I think it's been very well negotiated.
Yeah, I guess somebody explained the limits to the fire department of their authority.
Well, but it's also, they can ask.
Go look at the hills near Stanford where they just cut 20 feet around the edge of the property, and that's that. Okay, now the fun agenda item, 6C, discuss capital replacement plan priorities.
Okay, this item is on the agenda. We had a very healthy discussion at the last board meeting about the capital improvement plan and priorities. The plan had been referred to the member agency managers for discussion, and there had been quite a bit of discussion and some tours, and then the last report was that that we're looking at priorities and looking at the CIP in terms of overall assets. And the discussion was leading toward, why are we doing that when we have this CIP that's been discussed so much and has some pretty critical items? Why are we spending this time to defer items? Let's get going with the CIP, which makes sense. So in light of that discussion, the staff memo is here to provide background on why I think that we should spend a little bit of time to revisit the CIP before we start moving forward with the immediate projects, which have a very high price tag. And I prepared a presentation, so I'll go through that instead of going through the staff memo. The presentation says essentially the same thing. And then if you have any questions, I can go through the staff memo after. So, let's see how this will work. I've been off too long.
That's a new projector.
This is mine.
Oh. You know that Sam owns one.
I know, it was under a huge stack of papers though, so. I'll just put this here. Oh, sorry. Let's see, we have to get that in. Let me give it a second.
So is there a way you can kick out the name of the alarm monitoring company?
You wouldn't cry.
Champagne.
And then there's one that goes to the website, Roku
And me.
Okay, so should I get back here and give it from back here?
Please.
No.
Hey, Linda, can you grab that cable,
You have to use.
with your cable, just knock it down a little bit? It's-
Leonard, that's you.
it's that way.
It's not the same thing.
You can move the whole thing?
Each of the other.
And then, I get this guy to work. In my business. That's very good, okay. So, the, agenda for this presentation, and I tried to make it fairly brief, is, to provide an overview of the strategic asset management approach, which is really the driving approach behind why I think it would be worthwhile to look at the CIP one more time. To review the current CIP from this perspective and to discuss recommended next steps from staff's point of view. So strategic asset management coincidentally has the same acronym as SAM. And it's a concept that has been in process for a long time, and when it was applied to pavement much earlier than it was applied to infrastructure. But since 2005, since regulatory scrutiny has increased tremendously in the San Francisco Bay region, strategic asset management has grown. And actually in the past 2 years, really, it's just really come to the forefront as the way to manage assets. And the reason is because if assets are not managed strategically using this approach, it's almost impossible to meet the requirements of the regional board for almost any agency in the Bay Area. The approach focuses on level of service, making sure that each agency defines the level of service that is desired to begin with, so that the focus is on the big picture always, and not so much on the immediate need. And then to look at risk, which is defined as a combination of likelihood and consequence of failure. And this is very important because human nature is to focus on consequence, because consequence of failure evokes an emotion in us that wants us to go and take action. But if an asset has a low likelihood of failure, the consequence is not the driving factor, because if the asset doesn't fail, it doesn't really matter how bad it would be if it failed. There has also been a lot of discussion about effective utility management. Effective utility management is a concept that was developed by the EPA some time ago and supported by all of the water and wastewater agencies. And there are 10 attributes that cover all of the different aspects of agency management. And the objective of effective utility management is to find a way to achieve the best you can in each of the 10 attributes. And the reason why the attributes the 10 attributes were developed was to provide a well-rounded vision for management, so that an agency is not just looking at infrastructure, it's not just looking at financial, it's not just looking at staff, it's really taking a big picture perspective and maximizing performance in all aspects of the operations.
What was SSO?
Oh, sewer system overflow, or sanitary sewer overflow. Thank you for asking. I tried to get rid of as many acronyms as possible. So strategic asset management begins with level of service. And level of service, there's been lots and lots of discussion about level of service in the asset management world. Our natural inclination is to have level of service defined by how we do things. How many times we sweep the streets, how many times we change the light bulbs, how many times we change the pumps. But really, level of service is defined by how your customer sees you. So when you ask a customer, how would you say that Sam is, what would indicate to you that Sam is providing an acceptable level of service? They're not going to say, oh, because you change your pumps out every 15 years, because you clean 100 miles of pipe in 12 months. They're going to say it's because my toilet doesn't back up, because we don't have overflows to the ocean, because we don't ever hear about you, because if we heard about you, then we know that there was something wrong, and that we're getting what we are buying, we know that we're getting value for what we're paying for. And so the importance of defining and accepting and reiterating level of service is that it's very easy when you look at spending money and you look at projects to forget about this and to think about the individual issue that you're trying to solve with that project. So when you bring the issue and the project and the priorities back to level of service, it puts them in perspective relative to each other. And it's the perspective relative to of all of your needs relative to each other. That's what forms the basis of strategic asset management, because you're always looking at your system as a whole and at reducing risk from the big picture, from the perspective of level of service. And then from that level, the customer, we know what the customer wants, they tell us what they want, and the agency's job is to define how to provide this. So these are some pretty general concepts. Here, there's a lot of detail that goes into asset management when you're defining level of service. But in general, for a wastewater agency, providing, meeting the environmental protection level of service means you provide sufficient capacity. If you didn't provide capacity, you'd have overflows. Meeting the reliability services that you keep your facilities well maintained. And cost effectiveness is where strategic asset management comes in. It's not about cutting costs every step of the way. It's about spending your money wisely over the entire life cycle of your program so that your customers are never paying more than they have to for any part of your operations, today, tomorrow, or in the future. And the interesting thing about strategic asset management is the benefits are long-term. So you may not see the benefits today, but the customer 10 years from now will not be paying again for something that was done today. And that's where, over time, your life cycle costs go down. And your risks are also reduced. And so effective asset management is really based on the concept that an agency should try to spend as much effort as it can doing right things right. So if you look at this graph, what you do is along the left, so the right things are at the top and the wrong things are at the bottom, and how you do it's across the bottom. The right things are on the right, the wrong things are on the left. And in general, a typical organization spends about 20% of its time, of its effort, doing right things right. It spends about 80% of its effort doing right things wrong, doing wrong things right. When you do right things wrong or wrong things right, what happens is that half of what you're doing well, and the other half you have to go back and redo. Hopefully no organization is doing wrong things wrong, that they're able to correct themselves before they get there. And so the objective of strategic asset management is to take those red squares and get all of that effort and put all of that effort up into the upper right hand square. And what that means then is that you're spending your money where you need to, when you need to, and you're not wasting any money, you're not wasting time, and over the long haul, over your entire asset life, you're giving the best value to your customer. Strategic asset management helps agencies to define what is right. That's the hardest thing to define. And I should give an example. So, like in this graph, a wrong thing right might mean that that you get a beautiful set of plans and specs, or a beautiful report. It's detailed, it's very thorough, covers a lot of things, but it may not be based on good data. And I've seen that recently, not here actually, I've seen it at another agency, a spectacular report on flow data that was from a year where there wasn't any rain. So it looked beautiful, but when you dug into the details, there wasn't, you know, a lot. It was a beautiful report made from what could be obtained. But so that's a wrong thing right. The beautiful report was done right. The wrong thing was that the wrong data was collected in the first place. Very, very common. It's very common. Our whole life is filled with that, doing wrong things right and right things wrong. So strategic asset management helps agencies to define what is right by really focus on likelihood and consequence. It's a numerical process. It takes the emotion out of it. It focuses the actions that are taken on every project, every repair, every bit of maintenance, every decision on whether that decision addresses the current item that has the highest level of risk to the agency. And that list is constantly changing, because as you're fixing one thing, something else rises to the top of that list. As you document if you gain more information, the list changes. So it's a continuous process of checking and rechecking your data and your actions to make sure you're always up in that high upper right-hand corner. And the other thing that asset management does is, over time, it gives the confidence needed to stay in that upper right-hand corner. It's very, very easy to work on the yellow and to work on the orange. It's very easy to naturally tend back to that point, but as you use strategic asset management, you get accustomed to working up in the purple and the red, and you can comfortably not do the yellow and feel good about it. You don't feel like you're missing a project, or you should have done that project, because you feel comfortable knowing that you've assigned those projects a lower risk. That takes a little bit of time. So now looking at the current CIP, this is the 7-year CIP, projects expenditures of almost $6 million. So the question is, does it address the right things? We know we're doing what we need to do right, but are we doing right things right? And this is how the CIP has distributed the $5.92 million, nearly $4 million in the wastewater treatment plant, and the other expenditures spread between the pump stations, with a little bit there for the Vector, which I'm not sure. I mean, I know that's capitalized equipment, but I'm not sure if that should show up in the CIP.
Oh, so what's Vector?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a vacuum flushing sewer cleaning truck. Right now we have a flusher.
Oh, collections?
Right, for collections.
Okay.
It's a vehicle. So looking at the pump station part of that budget, and so this is the left-hand side of that graph with all the dark colors. If you look at the pump station list of projects, the pump station list includes a lot of routine maintenance. And there is a lot of maintenance that's needed, and all of the projects on there are needed. If you look at the requirements to meet level of service, to meet the environmental protection, and provide the reliability that most agencies expect to provide as this level of service to their customers, the existing CIP currently does not include projects that would meet the regional board reliability requirements today.
Is that something that you expect to be in the project's list, or is that something you expect to be in the agency's capabilities?
I would expect that to be in the project list. 'Cause those will be, that's looking at whether, you know, your station has enough capacity to convey the peak flow with the largest pump out of service. That's wet weather firm capacity. I mean, that's not something that
So is
agency
this
staff.
criteria that would be recorded alongside each of the CIP elements? Or is this something where you would actually expect to see a project for each and every one of those rectangles?
This is criteria, so when you're normally generating a CIP, you use a lot of criteria, and the criteria is typically reliability and safety, and, you know, there's lots of pretty standard criteria. In San Francisco Bay region, Region 2, when you're looking at pump stations, you always look at this criteria first. Because when the regional board comes, if you have a spill, the first thing they will look at is not whether your doors have new paint, they will look at whether you have wet weather firm capacity, whether you have the ability to bypass, and whether you have reliable backup power.
Didn't all that go into the construction of each of these elements?
The actual pump stations?
Yeah, like if you take the Chart House pump station, for example, when that was redone, a great deal of effort went into making sure that, I recall many of these elements were very clearly described and dealt with in the CIP.
They could be in the member agency stations. We were looking at the three SAM
No, this is a
stations.
SAM pump station.
For Chart House?
Isn't it?
What is Chart House?
That's Montero's. It's
I
called
think it's been
Canoff
renamed.
now.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
What are you calling
That's
it?
what I'm thinking of most recently, but I know in terms of, we've long talked in terms of like the Princeton pump station, which is an agency station, and Valmar and the others. I mean, it's, the notion of capacity, backup power, these things are not new. So I'm confused. If these aren't called out as criteria to be measured against for any CIP project, okay, well, that needs to be in engineering, certainly.
Right.
But what are you saying is missing?
The projects to address this criteria are not in the current CIP.
Wouldn't the decision about whether or not to have a project be dependent on an evaluation of a deficiency on one of these criteria?
Right, so the CIP lists projects. So the CIP, for example, lists replace pumps in kind at such and such pump station. So when you replace in kind, if that pump station does not have firm capacity, you'll put in new pumps, but not enough of them, not enough capacity. So if you're going to replace the pump, it would be better to have that pump sized for the ultimate criteria. Otherwise, you'll spend, you know, your $100,000 today, and then in 2 years have to put in a new motor and new colors or something.
So we've got
else.
a 35-year-old agency, right? And it would be news to me if a pump of a certain size was inadequate at this point. So it sounds like you're leading with the presumption that the infrastructure that we have in place is inadequate.
Right, well, so our pumps right now, when we have wet weather, which is less than the design storm, we have to use all of our pumps to keep the flow going. If we lost a pump, we would not be able to keep the flow going.
Is that the case of all the pump stations? I know it is at Tortola where, you know, when I was fairly new on the board, you know, we had some major storms, and I'm pretty sure that the operators went over and ran that pump station in manual mode so they could actually get the fourth pump going, which is never supposed to be done because the three big pumps kind of overwhelmed the fourth one. And so, you know, that's one clear case where if we lost one of the big pumps, we're in trouble.
I guess what I'm getting at is I want to make sure that I'm not misunderstanding. It looks like this is leading with conclusions, and I'm not seeing the conclusions being stated, and I'm not seeing them being supported.
Well, I don't know that we finished the whole presentation yet.
But this is why I'm asking the question, because I want to make sure I'm understanding what I'm looking at.
Okay, so I should back up. When we went through our pump station walkthrough, we talked about capacity, for example, reliable backup power, ability to bypass. These pump stations do not have any of this currently. So the CIP should presumably include a project to either evaluate it, or if it's been evaluated, to enable the agency to meet these requirements. The CIP was a list of maintenance items, did not include these types of projects or even an evaluation of whether these projects are needed.
So it's a gap.
And
So you're saying it's a gap.
there's a gap.
But this is what I'm questioning. If there's a gap analysis, I want to see it. If there's no gap analysis, I'm not ready for the conclusions.
So I heard very clearly that that we have a CIP and it was reviewed, and that these things weren't seen there. The absence of those things is a reality, and we can figure out what to do about it, but.
Well, but we've done a full system hydraulic analysis, for example, and it's been a while since we revisited that, and we certainly haven't revisited that since we put the project into the Burnham Strip. But it's not a new concept to understand whether or not we have enough wet weather capacity. This has been an ongoing area of study and engineering work now for the whole time I've been on this board, since around 2000. So understanding whether or not we have capacity, we have studies, documents to draw on to identify what we know about where we are right now. But what I think I hear you saying is that we just don't have the capacity.
During wet weather, we have to operate all of our pumps to keep the flow going. If we do not operate the largest pump, we will overflow. And that is a known based on storms that have duration and flow that's less than a design storm. So given that, we do not have firm capacity
So
because we should be able to take the largest pump out of
Can you elaborate on the word firm in that
So
expression?
firm is defined by the regional board, and it means your largest pump is out of service.
Okay, so if, I mean, I'm willing to accept for sake of argument the assertion that if we take our largest pump out, we'll have a problem. I'm fine with that, just for sake of argument. Although I'm not satisfied with that in the long run. I want to have a discussion about that, and I want to see some engineering around that. I want to see some numbers, I want to see some diagrams, I want to see some dependencies enumerated. When we say this system, I can visualize the system. I've seen it all. And I'm hoping that you guys now have a much better idea of what we're talking about. But honestly, that's a sweeping statement, so I'm trying to hone in on what are we getting at here.
So I'd like to kind of get through the rest of the discussion, but I hear what you're saying. However, I also heard a statement of fact that, so the regional board requires or recommends firm capacity, a term I've never heard in my beautiful ride on the sandboard. And so it's,
Welcome to the new terminology. I'm glad you guys are getting it tonight.
I
hadn't heard it before either.
So it's really important, right? If this is a regional board requirement, and right now we haven't had any problems with the regional board, thank goodness.
In quite a while, because we've done a whole lot of engineering around these criteria.
Right. So, but here's our criteria, and one of them is firm capacity. We know factually we don't, or we believe likely we don't. Fine. Let's take that and let's see the rest of the presentation.
Okay, I just the thing that I wanted, it didn't make sense to me, is the notion of somehow this is this big gap here, when in fact,
well,
the current draft of the CIP may not address whether or not the projects we have address these issues. I'm fine, but I don't want anybody walking away with this belief that somehow we're automatically going to be in Dutch with the regional board because we didn't fill this in, or that we have had any recent issues with the board.
So I heard this, and someone can yell at me from staff if I'm wrong. I heard that if we have a problem, and the regional board does an investigation, they're going to look for that. And if that's the source of the problem, we're in hot water. Is that correct?
Well, so
we have been through some of that, and we have had discussions with the regional board and with the EPA, and we have done some of the projects. One of the projects that our fine fellow member of our sister agency here didn't choose to participate in was driven directly from the work that the EPA, the regional board, and NOAA did in coming and investigating some of the difficulties that we'd had. The Burnham Strip project was a direct offshoot of that. And so the work that the agency has been doing over the years has been constantly aligned into these ways. If we have deficiencies, we need a patch gap identified appropriately, but I'm uncomfortable with the kind of the sweeping statement on this, because this is not, don't be shocked by the newness of the terms or the thoughts here. This is something that this agency, our staff and crew and engineers have all been working on for quite a while. So
I'm comfortable accepting the premise that there may be a shortcoming in our current CIP for this reason. And I'd like to see the rest of the presentation.
Yeah.
So, and
While we're on the slide though, can I ask you to define a reliable backup power? Because my understanding is that every pump station has an emergency generator that goes on automatically.
it does, the stations have emergency generators. Princeton has a new generator. The other two stations have each have a generator that has exceeded its useful life. There is ongoing need to update, rehabilitate, address the generators to make sure that they continue to be healthy and functional. There is nothing in the CIP currently regarding generators at all. There's no money at all in the 7-year CIP for any generator. And so I'm not saying that these are projects that should go in the CIP. What I'm saying is that we are planning to spend almost $6 million in 7 years, and we're not planning to spend any money here. And do we want to take a look at the CIP one more time and make sure that some of these items should get into that, either as, in addition to the 6 million or in place of some of the others, and defer other projects? Should we start spending the money? What we don't want to do is spend 6 million and then come back in 7 years and say, oh, we should have done this stuff. We didn't even address our risk. We spent 6 million, we have great door frames, but we still got spill. We don't want to do that. That's so asset management.
No, and I'm with you on that, and that's one reason for the past number of years I've been agitating to get
Thank you.
a list of our assets into some kind of asset management system, even something as simple as a spreadsheet with acquisition date, price, expected lifetime, anticipated replacement date need,
Right.
so that we can look at it periodically
Right.
and do a basic asset management approach, end-of-life reports and such. I mean, I'm real familiar with
Right.
all of this kind of thinking, so
Yeah.
I have no problem with that issue. I was just questioning, maybe it was just in the wording, but it sounded like kind of, I didn't want to let go by the notion that somehow we had not attended to these issues. We have attended to these issues very directly at a number of times. Your notion of we should be asking the question every time we do a CIP of have we attended to our needs on this front, I'm absolutely down with that. So with that, I think we're on the same page.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, we're on the same page.
So just, we probably don't have to go through this, but just for example, in the CIP, we have new pumps and motors, same size, replace existing. And because we do know that during wet weather, we have to put all our pumps out there into use, the new pumps and motors will be great and increase reliability during dry weather, but we still have a risk of SSO in wet weather. So we would spend the money on those pumps and motors, maybe not reduce our risk as much as we'd like to. And that's why I think the CIP for the pumps and motors should be revisited, just to make sure that we're putting in the right size, we're addressing the right needs. The same with the electrical gear, and I'll talk about the electrical gear later. I have a better slide for that. So liquid is one of those funny things. Sewer systems are completely unpredictable, but we try so hard to predict them, and what makes them so interesting is the water ends up somewhere. No matter where you think you're going to send it, if you plug it, if it can't get there, it goes somewhere else. It always finds a way out. What we're trying to do is to keep it from coming out. So if you look at our collection system as the bathtub fills up. We got to get rid of the water before it flows out onto the floor. So what do? We pump it out. So let's say now we don't have firm capacity in the peak wet weather storm. We can't pump it fast enough. What do? We drain it to storage. We are, we've been very proactive about that. We do have storage at 2 stations. So then what happens if the storage is too small in the peak design storm, which we did not design the full planned storage, which I think was a smart thing, because you don't want to put it all in at once, you do want to phase. Then we have to fix the faucet. We've got to turn the faucet off so no more water's coming in. If we can't fix the faucet, then we have an overflow. With each one of those steps, the cost to repair to remediate the issue increases. By the time you get to the overflow state, you're out of control. I mean, you not only have to bring in the cleanup company to clean up the damage, but you subject yourself to fines and a lot of other things. You're doing emergency work. Emergency work is extremely expensive, and you've just really increased your cost to repair. If you look at the system as a whole, you start from the top down and look at your level of service goals. The agency, any agency using strategic asset management, decreases their risk considerably at the best cost to the ratepayer. So let's say, for example, the agency determines that eliminating overflows is the ultimate service goal. That's not too hard to imagine. So then, to meet the criteria, you would potentially need to build more storage, need to upsize pumps and force mains, or fix leaks in the member agency collection systems. I'm looking at the prior slide. You basically have to go backwards and take care of these problems so you don't end up in the upper right hand. If you move too quickly forward with the replacement of existing equipment in kind, the agency is most likely, knowing what we've seen, doing the right things right. What you're doing is you're doing the right things, and you're doing them well, and you're very dedicated and putting these new facilities in place. But if you're down in the lower corner or the upper corner and you're in the lighter orange, not the darker orange, then eventually, and probably not, within 10 years, the agency will have to take that money that was spent and re-spend it again to do the right thing. So by taking a step back and looking at the CIP from an asset management perspective, you would theoretically, if the asset management is looked at correctly and the system is looked at as a whole, spend the money you need to spend now on the things you really have to fix now and defer what can be deferred until it has to be fixed, and that way you're paying for everything once. And what that does ultimately is it gets you on a nice, even asset management track, because asset management is predicated on the fact that your system will have a lifetime of replacement needs. Those replacement needs should never end. They should never end. If they end, that means that you fix some things too fast. You need to get everything out, extend life all the way to the end of its life cycle, and then replace. So you have a continuum of replacements. It's kind of like your house. You replace your kitchen and you replace your bathroom, but you don't remodel your, well, some people do, but most people don't remodel their whole house at once. They just take a little at a time. So then looking at the wastewater treatment plant, the budget for the treatment plant is $3.8 million. I just want to focus on the biggest ticket item, which is moving the electrical building. Moving the electrical building, the proposed cost is $1.94 million. It's the most urgent project. It's listed in the first year of the CIP. The reason for moving the electrical building is to get the building out of the flood zone. And it was predicated on an incident that occurred not too long ago. The project moves the building within the plant site to a location that's a little bit higher than where it is now. Right now it's in the lowest part of the plant. So I pulled up some flood maps, and the one up here, this is the FEMA 100-year flood map. So here's the creek that goes by our plant. The blue is the flood area. Flood really comes from the ocean. This creek is not projected to flood in a 100-year flood event. There is the potential that the levees could break. I think we need to be concerned about that. We don't know.
Being exactly where?
So our plant site's right there.
It's the berm around the plant.
The berm, I guess, yeah, I call it a berm.
So that closest circle around the star?
Yeah, so all this white is our plant in here. So this is our access road.
You know, I'm wondering if there's a misunderstanding about the flood. Sometime in one of the storms in the 90s, probably 97, 98 El Nino, the equipment came close to flooding, but that was because the plant didn't have the hydraulic capacity to get everything through that was coming in. And so the flood risk was never tsunami or creek flooding, but just lack of hydraulic capacity at the plant. So
That's influent inundation. It was never.
Yeah.
Has that been addressed through the upgrades?
Yeah.
That's been
Yeah,
addressed.
the hydraulic capacity of the plant is now 15.5 million
Right.
gallons a day,
Right.
whereas what was it before, a third of that or something?
About so.
The concern that we have about where the generator is now is the Fukushima problem with the overtopping of the berm with the tsunami,
Right,
which would be essentially a one-shot event, but it would drown the plant
right.
and leave it that way for who knows how long until we could get replacement generators in and safely get them hooked in. And, you know, I mean, honestly, we'd probably have to bring in pumping just to get it pumped out enough to be able to run our equipment. If
And
we
that's-
could after it had
and
taken
that's
on the water.
In that scenario, does not the entire plant get incapacitated?
Well, yeah, so this
Yeah,
map
close to
is,
plant.
this is the tsunami map. So the predicted tsunami zone is shown in red here, and the plant is where the star is located.
So is your point that moving the electrical equipment from the low point of the plant to a high point of the plant moves it around the tsunami zone?
It would still be within the tsunami
Well, it'd be
zone.
within the tsunami zone, but the elevation change that we're anticipating, Tony, do you remember how much that was? I mean, it was,
From down there up there.
yeah, isn't it like almost 20 feet?
No, about, it's 16 to about 22, so it's about 8 or 9 feet.
Well, it's
8 or 9 feet
8 or 9.
in elevation, rising at
the base, the pad the generator sits on would only be an 8-foot differential.
8 or 9 feet, which is equal to the top of the berm.
So the concern here is that we spend 1.9 million and we still have the same risk. We would not have reduced risk. I'm not saying that there is not risk presented by the electrical system, there is. But the equipment portion is less. And perhaps if the board is committed to spending this kind of money on electrical, we'd want to spend the balance, instead of relocating the building, of looking at the distribution system, which is, are like our arteries. If they're clogged, then it doesn't matter how good our heart is, it's not gonna get the power out to the ends or to the switch gear at the various critical equipment. There are other places to spend the money so that we're reducing our risk in the plant.
Yeah, it's just that if-
dome over the whole plant?
If that generator gets inundated, the plant's dead. It's one thing, we have suffered through spills and backups with too much coming in with the stormwater. But that recedes on its own, and it's not pleasant to deal with the regional board, but if we get overwhelmed with a 100-year storm, we know at some point, no matter how you build the system, we'll get inundated at some point in the system. I mean, the size of storms are getting bigger. The 100-year storms are happening every 25 years now. So, I mean, I think we're well aware that the weather is a big deal here, but none of those are life-ending events. If we kill the plant, it's like if we kill the digester, we took great care with that because we can't afford to kill the digester. If we kill the plant and its electrical capability, in doing the risk analysis, even though it's a lower probability risk of an overflow upstream somewhere, the consequences are much more dire.
So if you go back to the risk graph, and get all the way back here. So we're looking at, the consequence would be up in here, but where is the likelihood? Does the likelihood get us high enough up here that we're overcoming something that's in this quadrant? That's the question.
Well, and I agree.
And so that's where asset management comes in, and is moving the building reduce risk more than, say, leaving it there, but fixing the distribution system? That might reduce risk more than moving the
How
building.
does that reduce, well, okay, in the overall risk, if we're looking at trying to minimize risk as our objective function across every equation in the system, fine.
Like what is the,
But
what is the?
I know that fixing something upstream doesn't alter the risk that we have from tsunami here. It doesn't change it at all. It changes the objective function as a whole, but it won't change that individual element of the risk.
The tsunami, we won't reduce risk according to this map, unless it's a smaller
Well,
tsunami.
that map is not very detailed and shows us the area that would be inundated, but it doesn't show anything about elevation.
Right.
And so if we're able to, for example, to go, if an 8-foot differential makes the difference, then 8 feet is enough. If it needs to be 25 feet.
But see, this begs a really important question, right? Is 8 feet differential enough? Maybe.
Well, and we should ask the question.
Maybe not.
Right.
Maybe, and I think that's, well, what that's what I'm hearing, right? What's the right solution? And
Yeah.
I'm
Right.
hearing that, an item that we're gonna spend a couple $1,000,000 on, maybe, might not be the right project, and so we should look at that, and I think that's fair.
But there's a question about how to engineer it properly and whether or not that can be achieved on the property that we have with common, current engineering practice. I mean, if we could build an elevated platform for it to get an extra 4 or 6 feet out of it, maybe that's enough, but that creates a new problem because now we have more sound projecting to the neighbors. But if we buy the new one instead of refurbing the old one, you get a quieter thing. This is where that's an engineering problem. And-
Except that the cost that's in here is the projected cost to relocate the building. Those criteria should be, what if elevating the building, what if getting it out of the tsunami zone is gonna cost the agency $10 million? Then you would look at whether this would be your number one project. So
Sure.
so what I'm saying is this CIP just needs a little bit more work in looking at the recommendations to make sure that we are addressing risk.
Well, I don't want, I want to guard against the fallacy of false comparison too, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I understand the operations research aspect that you're describing with your red and yellow graphs, so I get that. But we've got to be careful not to engage in that logical fallacy either. We know, for example, that we had a risk that had been unmitigated at the point where we had the operator error that resulted in
Right,
a near calamity.
right.
So Tony instantly created new policy about how people are going to be supervised so that kind of thing can't happen. Which is exactly what we want to see. We learn from the things that happen, we make better procedures so it won't happen again. But that does nothing to address what happens when that thing gets overtopped. And I don't know about you, but every time I hear about an earthquake somewhere, I'm looking on the tsunami map and I'm looking at USGS and I'm seeing whether or not there's a tsunami alert. And I'm as concerned as you are, I think, about the health of our berm and how well that's going to hold up. It may not get overtopped and it still may get compromised and the generator still might get flooded, even though it never crested.
Well, I think that what you're saying is, I think the concern we all have. What I'm hearing that I like is having a fresh look at the CIP and saying, gee, looking at it from this point of view of risk, likelihood, consequence, and cost, how do we get the most bang for our dollar? What is the most important thing that we authorize to do in spending our money? So I've got no issue whatsoever with Vivian taking a relook at this. It might come back very similar, I have no idea.
Right.
I think it's a very worthwhile exercise, and my point, Scott, is I don't think we should be throwing any rocks at anything yet until we've seen all this, and then we can say, yeah, this is a worthwhile exercise to see if we're spending our money in the best areas. So I'm open-minded at this point.
Well, I am too, but in order to be open-minded about it, we have to guard against the logical fallacy of false choice, for example, and that one I think, I don't know that talking about...
What's fallacy, what's the
All
false choice?
right, let me take it back to, in plain language, I don't know that dealing with upstream capacity limitations necessarily has anything to do with what we do about the generator. Except that the only reason that one would have anything to do with the other is if it's a zero-sum game. If we only have $1 to spend and we can only spend it on one or the other, then that would be interesting. But that is not the case here. It's really a question of what are our needs and what are our resources to address those needs. It may be that if we do a gap analysis, we find that we really need both, and so we need to pony up and find more money.
Could be.
And that might lead to grant writing, that might lead to going back to our constituencies and saying, hey, we need a little more. It might mean sacrificing something else. But the fallacy of false choice is about presenting something as an A-B choice when in fact it might not be that at all. And so here, I really don't see addressing tsunami risk, the health of the berm, and the elevation of the electrical as being tied in any direct way to what happens at our individual pump stations, except by virtue of the notion of a fixed budget. And I don't believe that
So I
that's
think it's a
our
system.
situation.
So I look at, you know, if you do like a failure mode and effects analysis, like you do an analysis around the whole system, you gotta stand back and look at the entire system. I
I
think
agree
it's
with that.
a component of the system. And
But the thing I'm
And I
guarding,
will-
the thing
Scott, I will
I'm
tell you
warning
that
against.
that tour was a real eye-opener to me. We started here at the plant, and the plant's not bad looking, okay? Maybe we had some elevation issues, electrical, whatever. But I have to tell you, we got out to some of the pump stations, and some of the generators, I'm like, wow, there was some really interesting things I think the Smithsonian would like to see. And I, I really am concerned that within the system, we may want to reprioritize where our money goes based on this concept of failure, risk, and so forth. So I am totally on board with this relook, then allowing staff to come back to us and say, okay, now this is the way I think we can best spend our money. We can still ask our questions, but personally, to me, I mean, that one place with the generator and the roof that got on fire, I mean, there were some real interesting things I saw on that tour that I think need to be addressed. So I think what's happening here is time and money well spent.
So let me just pitch in with, one of the reasons I don't think it's, I don't think it's these things in opposition to each other. When you say that the number is roughly $6-something million over a period of 7 years, we're talking about CIP spending of less than $1 million a year. I think Tony may have been asking for less than we need. And
so I'll tell you, that may be possible.
Could
I don't
be.
think it's an A, I'm not hearing it's A or B. I'm not hearing we need to spend less. You know, I wanna spend the right amount. And I don't think anybody on the board is gonna support, is saying anything different than that. So I don't entirely understand where you're coming from, but I want you to come from there. And,
Well,
but
there's-
I'm not tracking with you entirely. I think this is a logical engineering mindset.
Are we getting ahead of ourselves? Shouldn't we allow this to get finished and then we can discuss? I think when she says to us, okay, I don't want to do the electrical for 50 years.
I think what.
Then we could say,
Yeah.
okay, wait, time out, I'm not comfortable with that. Gee, I want the electrical done in the next 3 years. And then, okay, what's the funding, where's the money, do we have to go get bonds, you know? I don't think we've gotten to that point yet, I think we're a little ahead of ourselves. I don't think we've had,
Well, and that's-
we've had a chance to finish this.
And that's precisely why I spoke up, because I heard some conclusionary statements, some sweeping statements that brought an implication about some conclusions for facts not in evidence. Okay, so
Let me get some water.
if that's how we're gonna start off, I wanna make sure that we go back, we make sure we understand what's being said. And I think in doing that, I think we're getting a little more nuance to this. I'm feeling less concerned about some of the sweeping statements, knowing that we are all thinking about these and are aware that there are some limits to, you know, what can be drawn from the statements made so far. So I think it's a matter of, let's get on the same track before we go down it, so that we don't wind up with some preconceived notions that are drawn from.
I'm open-minded.
Okay, so that's,
I think maybe we ought to try and go through the rest of the presentation and not have discussion, but just questions as we go along, and then let's pile all the discussion at the end. But I have one question on this. What is the,
You just broke your rule.
well, no, it's a question. I said, let's do questions as we go along, but discussion is now.
Which one of your things?
What's the elevation above sea level of the high point where?
Well, I wanna hear, I'm sorry, I wanna hear your question.
What's the elevation above sea level of the high point where we were talking about moving the generator building to?
Over here, I believe it's about 23 feet.
Well, that's interesting, because the El Granada School is at 42 feet, that's the tsunami evacuation point, and it no longer meets the federal criteria, which are now 47 feet.
well, it's a
So
lot of kids,
putting
that's
the-
a lot of feet.
Putting the building at 23 feet seems to be a problem.
I'd like to
I-
make one comment. So my recollection of the study, and Tony is going to correct me. The study was, the basis of the study was to protect the wastewater treatment plant, electrical building from flooding. So
What
this-
study, you said the study?
The study that was created, that created this project. There was an electrical reliability study that was approved by the board and was
So
completed.
that was the subcontractor to SRT?
Correct. So to meet that assumption, the building was moved so that the foundation of the building was at the elevation of the berm. That way, if the berm overtopped, the building would be above that level. So we're looking at this diagram up here, the 100-year storm, where the berm's overtopping. I don't believe that that study looked at tsunami risk. So the questions that Director Boyd raises are very good questions for this study. If we're looking at tsunami risk, what does the solution look like? What's it gonna cost? Can we even meet it? Is it even feasible to meet? And I think that those are the types of questions that we want to ask before we implement a $2 million project. Make sure that that study is all-inclusive so that we're looking at our risk, the risk that we think we're trying to address.
I'm sorry,
how
I'm
much it's gonna
confused.
cost.
Just one. So I thought I heard you saying that the elevation was set for the overtop level of the berm.
Isn't that correct?
That's,
Yeah.
but that is for the tsunami risk.
No, that's for flooding of the creek. The tsunami risk is this map. It goes well beyond the.
No, the area, but much of the area is lower lying than that point would be. And it's got a natural drainage off into the creek once there's the big issue with the tsunami is when it washes up over the berm. I mean, it's that one act that may last just a few minutes. It's like if you watch the video from Santa Cruz Harbor or the harbor up north. I mean, these are not generally what the California coastline has experienced in recorded history has not been big giant things, except where, I mean, there was the stuff up at Crescent City, but what we ought to be doing is looking at, okay, in the various scenarios, what kind of likelihood of elevation of tsunami are we looking at?
So Vivian, where did you get that information?
It's from one of the, I can't remember which one.
Yeah, what this doesn't show,
California
what that
Coastal
map will
Commission.
never show is what kind of maximum elevation are we looking at, or what kind of rise in the waters are we looking at?
But Tony, do you recall if that study addressed tsunami? Wasn't
I
it?
don't recall tsunami.
No, it was
It's-
potential flooding.
Yeah, see,
Either internal or
what I don't recall from any of that was worrying about flooding coming from on land or even surge coming up through the creek. What I got out of that, and maybe I was wrong, maybe I came with a preconceived notion, but my notion was it was the Fukushima scenario, and that was all about tsunami overtopping a berm.
I don't recall tsunami. I do recall if the beach didn't breach and the creek backed up.
Mm.
A couple of
Okay. Well, I'm glad we explored that because I was unaware of that. That map is generally regarded as an inundation map, and so I'm used to looking at those for other areas. And what that won't show is the kind of activity or the height of that thing. It only shows
Right.
with the kinetic energy it's got, how far inland will it go.
And so the recommended next steps, I think before the agency spends the money that's planned in the CIP, is to review all of the recommendations, make sure that they're complete, look at them holistically. For the wastewater treatment plant, look at reliability for the whole plant, not just electrical. I mean, we know electrical's a problem. Are there other issues that are a problem from a reliability perspective? Are there other things that might bring the plant down that we want to think about and figure out if they're more likely to happen or not? Pump stations and force mains, the same thing with capacity and reliability before we start putting in brand new pumps and brand new motors that we're gonna have to spend quite a bit of money for. I think that the CIP should separate the maintenance needs from reliability. It's very distracting to look at painting and those sorts of things in the CIP. It takes away from the big picture. So we can separate them either within the CIP or we could actually just develop a list for the maintenance budget. That would depend on how the board wants to move forward.
There's some things in the CIP that a certain previous manager put there that I was livid over at the time. It was just this arbitrary thing that supposedly came from the accountant, that if it was over $5,000, it was capital. And so the maintenance items, I for one agree that all the maintenance items need to disappear out of CIP and go back into some other budget. They don't belong in CIP.
And then I think we should look at all of the projects using a strategic asset management approach. Make sure we're not of being emotionally driven by consequence of failure, which is very, very natural and very, very common. And we look at likelihood and consequence, and we use a numerical approach to really take the subjectivity out of it, just to make sure that we are really addressing the highest risk items. And look at the cost for what it's gonna take, and, you know, I agree with Director Boyd, there are new projects that are gonna show up here, and the overall picture may increase in cost, but the annual expenditures may or may not, depending on how the risk profile washes out. And so based on the results, establish new budgets and timelines, and then move forward with any kind of major infrastructure.
So Vivian, is there any direction by, for the present CIP, that is the electrical, moving the generator, is there any direction by state or federal agencies that influence that original decision to change the location of the generator? Tony, is there any direction on that?
It's not the specific outcome, but we do need to make sure the plant operates. So that's.
There was no influence over any other agency.
But that's where the agency needs to balance likelihood and consequence. If you have a strategic plan in place and something happens, and stuff always happens, you're not gonna implement the CIP and have nothing break. Things happen, there are accidents, there are unforeseen events. But if something like that happens and you do have a violation, if you have a strategic plan in place, you've given it a lot of thought and you're implementing the plan, you're funding and implementing the plan, you're in a much better position to discuss what happened and what you could do later to alleviate that issue than if you don't have that kind of a plan in place.
What's your timeline to review this?
Well, the original plan was to reconvene, so the member agency managers, and this is what started the discussion last meeting, the member agency managers have been reviewing the electrical study and the CIP for some time, have met once, have toured the facilities, and we were planning to reconvene, gather everyone's thoughts, come together with some kind of a discussion for the board for a workshop. And that was where the discussion began of, what are the managers doing when the board should be doing that, looking at all of this, which I agree with. So, I guess I'm looking for direction as to what the board would like to see as next steps. We could continue with the manager approach, or we could have a board workshop.
But before you go on to that, Vivian, I just, I followed you through the whole thing, but again, what's the single most critical, risky thing that we have on the present system? What's the most critical issue we have?
You mean the weakest link?
What's the weakest link? What's the
I'd say
weakest
you'll
link?
probably, from a likelihood of failure and a consequence perspective, probably will find it at one of your pump stations. The likelihood of something failing that would create a spill into water, most likely, something that could happen this winter, you'll probably find at your pump station, but that's just gut feeling based on what I've seen elsewhere. It's not from any kind of analysis. We'd need to look at that analysis.
On the original CIP, were the pump replacements and the motor replacements visualizing newer equipment or just kind of replacing in kind?
I think it's replacing, if we upgrade, there's a whole downstream effect on enforcement and everything, so that all has to be looked at.
Because the one thing that disturbed me in looking at the pump stations, and listening to Tony, some of these pumps and motors are virtually out of production. It's really hard, like 6 months to get parts and everything. And I understand that there's much newer equipment, but very expensive. But I think again, in the bigger picture, it sounds to me like you may spend more now, but get more life and have the ability, if something fails, be able to replace it quickly and have current equipment. So that's one thing that concerned me when I got to visualize the equipment, and I love the one with the drive shaft. I'm like, wow, some of this stuff really looks older. And then Tony explained how there is much newer equipment out there, much more expensive. But in terms from a SAM perspective, a system perspective, you know, the potential for an overflow, you know, trying to, and that's where I think we need to know what is the most likely thing that can fail. Where do we best spend our money first? That's my concern. And it's, if an older pumps, we can get a bargain for, you know, 50 grand, but a brand new one's 75, but it's newer, better, more reliable. My preference is always buy the better equipment, get more life at it, have less issues.
And I guess one question that could come out of that was that discussion held when the CIP was developed? Does the CIP cost out equipment in that way? You know, that level, that relates to the level of service discussion, and if, you know, that could change the CIP estimates. And that's also important to get these costs right, because you're gonna need to fund these projects. So if the costs are not correct, you know, when we go forward and do a project, there may not be funding for it if these assumptions aren't embedded in the beginning, so that's an important point.
Did you guys have discussions about the VFDs that we've got?
I think we may have mentioned it.
Okay. I mean, we've gone through some pump upgrades over the past few years to go from being all on, right, you know, the motors that kick on full and gone to the variable speed.
Yeah.
It not only saves money on only spinning as fast as you need to spin, but also is easier on the downstream pipe because you're not doing the big hammer.
Right, we talked about that.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, there was another reason for the VFDs, if I recall, and that was the generator couldn't take having all three pumps kick on at the same time at full speed.
But again, I'm happy with this. I think the more time we look at where we're gonna spend $5 or $10 million, the better we are long-term. So I think this approach, to me, I'm very happy with this. I'm gonna be interested to see, when this is done, how does this compare to the old CIP? Where are the differences? Why are there differences? And then, and I agree with Vivian's point, if something does happen, and that can happen, and we get looked at, the agency get looked at, and we've spent a lot of time and effort trying to put our money where it's best used, I think there's an understanding that we're trying very hard to ensure we don't have spills. So I think this is a great approach. I'm very happy with
So
this.
Vivian, what again was your suggestion for the next step? Repeat that, please.
I think we should step back and before moving forward with the CIP, evaluate it holistically, make sure that all of the components, system-wide, plant, pumps to end, collection system, and they should be separated. They're looked at differently, as separate entities are reviewed to make sure that we have all of the projects that we need and they are prioritized based on risk.
So how would you do that again? How would you actually do that?
So I was envisioning doing that using the member agency managers and stepping through it with, you know, maybe a 4-hour meeting or an 8-hour meeting, going through a numerical analysis with them.
And then you would present that numerical analysis to the board in some sort of matrix?
Right. Yeah, there would be some time after that to cost out the projects and that sort of thing, but really to develop the priorities to work with the managers.
I think it's a good approach. Personally, I would prefer, once that's finished, rather than do this at a regular meeting, maybe we have just a full-blown study session with the managers here and the ability to discuss why have they ranked or rated their projects where they see them, and kind of a little bit of a beauty contest to figure out how much are we looking at spending, why are we looking at it, and how are the projects getting ranked or rated. And at the end of the day, then we make that final decision, okay, where does the money go?
Ellen, this is deja vu again. This is the same point, counterpoint. That sounds great, but that's fine to go in that direction. But I think that the managers, the engineers could get together and come up with some conclusions, and then the board would decide separately as a board.
Well, no, but
based
isn't
on
that what you just said?
Yeah,
though?
yeah,
Because, I mean, what he said was,
the board makes the
beauty
decision.
contest, they give all their arguments, and then the board takes the
But
decision.
no, but not together, not the managers.
Let them do their thing, but I
Now, he
would
was,
have,
he was
I,
suggesting a study session, and then a board meeting would follow. Is that-
Follow, okay, I got it.
I don't think we're in disagreement on
Okay, I'm sorry.
it. And by
But
the
if
way,
Jim, if
the-
you wanna continue to disagree, it's fine.
I respect
insist
their
that we
opinions, I wanna hear what they have to say.
No, actually, I wanna affirm what you said about, you know, I am a big supporter of taking the asset management approach to this thing and taking that holistic view, and I think, I would put it in these terms, and this is not, don't misconstrue this as talking about squandering money, but I think we really ought to see, if we're gonna look at the risks that this agency faces, what would we ask for if we could have everything we wanted? And then see what we can actually afford. And that, in my view, is what a CIP needs to ultimately be, is we take everything that we know that we need and rank order it, and we start at the top and we go until we run out of money. And if we really, really, really need more money, we do the needful and we go back and we ask our constituents for it. If we don't actually need all of it, we keep some of it in reserve because, you know, every now and then we will have a pipeline in the road that just is in danger of collapse, and we're gonna need some room to deal with it. So I'm in big agreement, and especially with the point about being driven by the needs analysis, especially in interaction with regulatory agencies. The wet weather project was one more step in a whole series of steps that we've taken that came as a direct result of past experience, not only with trying to have the system perform better than it was capable of performing. I mean, it had real limitations. That's why we did the first retention tank up in Montero. That's why we did the second retention tank in Grenada. And we've got a good solid 10-year, 13-year history, 14 of you know, taking deliberate looks at that. And the one thing that is constant in this is that we have to keep looking at that, because how we're doing now is we're never done, right? This is something that, like you were talking about, it's the things you remodel around the house. Well, I remodeled the kitchen. We never need to look at the bathroom or anything else, right? No, it's, so it's a lot of worse just to say I agree with you.
That was a lot of work. So I agree. So for all, are we all on the same page? Do we need a motion, or is it direction of the board?
I do want to add one more thing. There is the chance that we would need some engineering support to go through the initial study. There is a lot of work that's been done on the collection system, looking at flows and hydraulics. There's lots and lots of work. I haven't found yet a reliability study for the treatment plant, and, you know, which was kind of spurred by reading the electrical. The electrical is one part of the plant, so there might be a need for that. I mean, if we did get consultant support, it would be within the purchasing policies, and if it were something that would need to come to the board, I'd bring it to the board. But I just want to bring that up, is that could be one area where we'd want to get some outside help.
Do you have, I don't even, do you have an authority to spend up to X?
Yeah.
And how high does that go?
So up to 5 without competing proposals, and then up to 30,000 without board approval, and then board approval above 30,000.
Well, 30 would get you your engineering work, wouldn't
Oh,
it?
absolutely,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to see this done sooner than later, in the next couple months, by beginning of next year, to really have a good plan going forward, so we especially can look to put this into the upcoming budget. And I personally, I'd like to see us with the capital improvements, you know, going out, be able to say to each of the agencies, hey, look, we spent a lot of time on this. In order to be really safe and cautious, we're looking at each of the agencies having a plan to spend X in the next 3-5 years, whatever that number is. I think that's a very important thing to be able to tell everybody.
I would state part of Scott's scenario a little differently, which is you have this ranked list of things that need to be done, and you essentially you look at how much money you have to spend year to year, and the ranked list gets cut off at yearly sections, but then you have to look at, are any of the items that have been pushed into future years are they such that they can't wait until that year, in which case now you have to go back and come up with more money?
Right.
Yeah.
And you'll know that from this evaluation, because the associated risk will be now known along with that project. So you'll know if I don't do this project, I'm in the yellow, I'm in the red, I'm wherever. And then you can decide, maybe I should fund this project, or maybe I'm willing to take that risk.
Now, what do you have in mind for engineering firms? The SRT has a lot of recent understanding of the system, and to go out and bring in somebody else, they're going to be spending some amount of time just learning the whole system.
Right. And I know they have a lot of knowledge of the collection system. I don't know how much knowledge they have of the plant. So, and they would definitely receive, according to purchasing policy, I have to get 2, and they would be 1. I can tell you that right now.
What was that again? I'm sorry.
Our purchasing policy, if it's over 5,000, then we are required to get 2 proposals. And this would be over 5,000. I can't imagine that it could be completed adequately for under 5,000.
I'd like to propose that we've discussed this enough. I'd like to ask through the chair, if I may be so bold, anybody not concur with this direction? Otherwise, I'd like to move forward.
I'm looking at the staff memo, and there's no
Do we need-
suggested motion.
Do we need a motion for this?
I
Or just
would
direction to-
appreciate direction to continue with the recommended next steps, including obtaining,
Oh, so for up in the form of a motion, formalize it?
Sure.
I would move that we direct the interim general manager to follow the recommended next steps regarding the strategic asset management plan, to work with the agency managers to develop a review of the systems and bring that back to the SAM board for a study session from which the SAM board can take direction.
Did you, just a little point of clarification, did you mean engineers and managers, or just managers?
I think it was with managers and then bringing in engineers for support,
If needed.
if needed, which is likely needed.
And I would say SRT already has 2 task orders under their existing contract to assist with 2 of the pump stations.
Oh, okay. So
Or
that's
no,
what
to
you-
assist with the CIP.
So, did you get a second? I'll second it.
I do not, thank you.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded, to basically direct the interim manager to do what's on this chart, right?
Correct.
Any further discussion?
Can we get the slides
Yes, oh, yes, I brought handouts, actually, at my desk,
electronically?
but I'll
Yeah.
send them to you electronically.
Hearing no further discussion, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed, any abstentions? Okay.
We have to go back to the,
Yeah. Yeah.
warrants.
We pull the projector.
I didn't kill the projector.
Oh, yeah, turn with that, actually, if
That's
you
your
could,
personal projector.
just in case it decides to.
All right, so we're going back to the consent agenda item, approved disbursements for November 2013. I have a question on one of them. I thought that we didn't need the rain for rent tanks anymore, but there's still some minuscule payment here. It's like, what's that, half a tank or something?
No, we're renting a trash pump from them.
Oh. It says tank rental
No, there's not.
on the
Oh,
on
we
the
also,
memo?
I'm sorry, we were renting a chemical tank from them.
Oh,
We're not anymore.
okay.
so.
Director Clark, did you have any questions on the
I think we would like to bring up that there is one check here that will be voided, and that is for the environmental.
The city hasn't been checked.
Right.
Right, for the 8,100.
So that,
dollars, that's for the permit.
where's that?
Decided we don't
For
want
the
the permit or
weed
what?
No,
The weed abatement,
there'll be
you're
a
gonna get
separate,
another.
there'll be another check
Okay.
based on the second quotation and the
Okay.
decision based on that.
Right,
I don't have a good catch.
so that's check number
You'll never see it.
75604, we'll void that check to the city.
Not
Or
in my
we,
file.
or we
We
could hold it.
we could hold
We
it,
could
right.
hold it.
Okay, either way,
All right.
Suggested we to hold it and change the name of the payee.
that's a good, well, it's a good catch,
All
so.
right.
It goes to
We'll
them and
hold
then
it.
they pay, so if we just-
Alright, so I'm not clear on what we've actually decided to do with that one.
So I think now we're recommending to hold it until we know.
So we're leaving it on the report to be approved, in this motion.
Can I ask a question? I said, maybe it's here, or I don't have it, but on BW Housing and Associates, do we have a breakdown?
Yes,
On that, can you,
and I have a question about it too.
can
You want to look at it, Jim?
well, yeah, can you maybe in the future, you could, while you're the interim manager, would it be reasonable to kind of give us an idea of how you're doing and the charges, how they break down, if you don't mind? Yeah, go ahead,
And there is a cover letter that should have also
is there?
accompanied that.
Is it attached?
It's not attached.
No,
It's
it's
in
just the
file.
invoice.
I can get that.
So does that have a detail of different tasks?
Yeah,
Yes, but I have a question about a pump station bypass plan development, parentheses, project engineer. Who is that?
So we had toured the effluent pump station and the other pump stations with Schaff and Wheeler, who is a pump station design firm that does pump station bypass plans for the regional board, looking at whether there are options for this winter to put something in place with the reasonable costs and without impacting the pump stations in case there's an issue. And the plan, we were anticipating having trailer mounted pumps and piping and whatnot, on site, so that if needed, we could bypass the pump stations. I brought them on because they've done this many, many times before, and they've done it to the satisfaction of the regional board.
So they were a consultant for you?
Well, yeah, they're
For
not
your
under
company.
contract yet. I just asked them to come out and take a look and see if it was even feasible, if it is even something we could do.
So is that something that the regional board is suggesting they'd like to see, that capability?
They require every agency to have bypass pumping capabilities. Because we don't have them, it would be beneficial to have an ability to bypass pump in an emergency should something happen.
Well, if they require it, why have we not heard this before?
I can't answer that,
Not sure. I mean, we've been working on it for some time.
Anything else or a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the warrants.
Is there a second?
Clarification, with the exception of the one check to the city of Half Moon Bay, which is withheld?
I thought we're still approving it, but not sending it out.
Let's withhold it, because what if the amount's different? I think we should void that check.
Yeah, that makes more sense to me.
so with that understanding,
Yes.
So the motion is to approve it with the deletion of that check.
Okay.
Void check number 75604 for your chair.
Thank you. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, abstentions, motion carries. And item 7, interim manager's report.
And so anticipating a long discussion on the interim manager's report is short. And in future reports, I will include a summary and discussion of what was accomplished during the prior month. I would like to update the board on a few things that are pending. One is the post-employment benefits study, which is a study that is required for our audit. And the study, we contracted with Mr. Idelson to do the study. He has provided preliminary results and tells us he'll have a final report to us by December. And we're anticipating bringing the study to the board, and asking him to also make a presentation to the board in January. And at the same time, if the auditor is satisfied with the study, we're anticipating also bringing the auditor's recommendations to the board as well in January. We are working with our attorney to update personnel policy. That is also in progress. We're anticipating bringing a new policy to the board in January. And that would basically update what we have and also incorporate the requirements of the current MOU. And I just wanted to remind the board of last month's approval of canceling the December meeting. There still will be check signing, so we will be asking one board member to come and sign checks, but there will not be a meeting unless there is an emergency or other item that the board wishes to discuss as a special board meeting. That's all I had.
Thank you. And we do have the applicant interview meeting tentatively scheduled.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, item 8, attorney's report.
Nothing, Mr. Chairman, we did have another CASA Attorneys Committee meeting. I'll have a written report for you for your next meeting. We just happened recently.
Okay, thank you. Item 9, director's report.
I have a quick item, so I'd like to ask at our next, our January meeting, if see if Effenberg grants me the privilege of remaining on this board. I'd like to suggest we have an agenda item in one of the upcoming meetings, doesn't have to be the next meeting, on I don't know what we call ours, we have, the Half Moon Bay City Council reviews and agrees upon and signs a code of conduct, code of ethics, like of principles we operate by. And I'd like, I think it's helpful. It's how we communicate, how we treat one another, how we speak to the public, and all those kinds of things. And I think that would be beneficial, and I'd like to bring the example of the one that we have, share that with the board, and with the understanding that I'd like us to consider adopting something like that.
Jim, would that be a standalone thing, or is that something that would go into bylaws, which this board doesn't actually have? And maybe we should.
We have policies though, I don't know, and we ever adopted them? Like some of them?
Code of ethics?
Yeah.
I haven't.
We have policies, and I've been thinking we ought to probably consolidate all of our
cities, though.
policies.
Into
And
bylaws.
this would be one that would go in.
Ours is,
I
it's
have seen this.
it's a one-pager, 10 bullet points.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should certainly look at it, and
Sure.
be an interesting discussion.
Well, would you just wanna give that copy to
Yeah.
her?
Yeah, we'll get it, and you can send it around to everybody, and then we just make it an agenda item at the next meeting, if that's okay with you.
Okay.
Or would it be as part of the policy, and procedures?
Let's look at it, have a thought. We can probably argue about it for a while.
You
Well,
might wanna send it to
we
them.
could yell and scream at each other about it.
Rick, you might wanna send it to Vivian.
I'll send it to Vivian, yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
So this morning, I went to a Senate subcommittee, and I can't remember the name of the subcommittee or the name of the committee, but it was, the subcommittee was chaired by State Senator Harry Hill, and it's basically safety issues and is the CPUC doing its job and how do we fix it. It was pretty interesting, and might be on the news tonight, because there were video cameras there. And I made some comments at the end, they allowed for public comment, and I saw Jerry taking notes, so he must have liked some of my comments, which notably is they spent much of the meeting talking about how certain trees are diseased in the forest, and I said, yeah, it's the forest that's sick. And the best presentation was a guy there from the FAA. And it's like, what does the FAA have to do with gas pipeline safety? But it's the philosophy of how you do the safety. mentality all up and down the organization. And there will be a follow-up hearing somewhere early next year. That was a pretty interesting thing to go to. And Jerry sent me through the electronic invite system a personalized invite. So
Wow.
I thought I had to go.
They're required. Otherwise,
Oh.
they'll find you.
Not like here where we were gonna send you through the pipeline to do the visual inspection. Very different thing, huh?
No, we're gonna have them clean the digester.
Again,
This is why we need that policy.
You know,
Is this the point you were trying to make, Rick?
It might be related, yeah.
yeah.
It's only because we love you, Lynn.
Many years ago, when we had to redo the junction structures in the Burnham Strip, I was asking about some concrete offset box or something, and they said that's to catch the pigs, and it's like, what? Does everybody here know what a pig is in the context of a sewer system?
Yeah, I know it's 9 o'clock, so.
I heard a motion to adjourn.
Second,
Aye.
aye,
Okay, we're adjourned.
okay.
Now that the meeting's over, sir, what's a pig?
That was in the James Bond movie, they put him in a pig.